So, Renato, did this Fulton County grand juror completely screw everything up?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet. So Asha, talk about this thing with the Fulton County grand juror is like the definition of complicated.
Okay.
It's hard to understand. And I will just tell you, it's funny because my original take on this, when I first saw this, I'm like, okay, this is actually not complicated. This is a humongous problem. And it's actually a little more complicated because of Georgia grand jury law, but it's not. I got a lot of commentators on Twitter who are like, oh no, it's no big deal. And unfortunately, it is kind of a big deal.
Okay. So, can you explain first the Georgia law? Because it's different than the secrecy laws or the rules around federal grand juries.
Correct, and really also federal grand jury law in most states, as far as I know.
Okay.
So typically, grand jurors cannot share anything about what happens in the grand jury. That's just there are absolute secrecy laws, and so if you share what happened before the grand jury, witnesses can share, but
Okay.
if a prosecutor or a grand juror shares what happens in the grand jury, they can actually be charged with a crime. It's serious business. And so
Are they ever?
Yeah, the Barry Bonds case is a very interesting one. That was one where there was a whole investigation because there were leaks from the Balco grand jury about his the steroids scandal with Barry Bonds, and I think they actually put a reporter in prison for a period of time to try to get her or to reveal her sources, is my recollection. But it was, they went really hard on that case because it was very problematic to them that somebody was revealing what was happening in the grand jury. And it did, obviously have an impact on his life.
And so before we get into the Fulton County, can you maybe break down the policy reasons behind this? So ostensibly it's to protect the rights of the potentially accused, right?
Right.
But in that case, why then allow witnesses to talk but not grand jurors? In other words, why not a blanket secrecy? In other words, what is the secrecy trying to protect against? Because I think that will help illuminate the contrast with Georgia law and why this is problematic.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's more complicated to go to something again when you're talking about trying to restrain somebody who's a witness to a crime from talking about it. There's a First Amendment issue there. So, you've been assaulted and you want to tell the world about it, and suddenly because you were asked about it in a grand jury, you are gagged forever from discussing, your injuries and the horrific crime you suffered. So that, I think that would be my assumption of why, witnesses aren't. But that has been the rule for a long, long time. Whereas
by contrast, I assume the grand juror is sort of a temporary civil servant, if you will. In other words, they're kind of acting at the request appointment of the court, and so they can be held to kind of a different standard.
Yeah, they're effectively, they're all sworn in as a sort of they are acting as an officer of the court.
Correct.
And the grand jury is part of the court system. And so I think it's it is, they're acting sort of as part of the system in which we prosecute criminal cases. And so I think grand jurors, their ability to talk are heavily restricted, which is why You don't see it. You don't see this happen. And I think the instant reaction from pretty much every lawyer who saw this, who had anything to do with criminal law, was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. This is a worst thing. She should keep her mouth shut. She's violating her oath, so on and so forth. I had all sorts of private chats with other people who had been prosecutors who were just absolutely livid about this. But under Georgia law, it's a little different. If you, and I kudos to the Georgia lawyers who are pointing this out. Her only oath was to not reveal deliberations. So anything other than deliberations, technically speaking, she could reveal. And so then I guess that brings the question, and a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, are thinking this, then so why is this a big deal? Why are we even talking about it this week? And I will tell you that most of the commenters on Twitter were that way. They're like, Mariotti, you're making something out of nothing. She could totally do this. It was super okay. And, the reality of the situation is more complicated than that, because the law is not as black and white as a lot of folks think it is. In other words, yes, it's true that she had the right to say these things. However, I would say there's going to be a couple obvious consequences. One is there's going to be a whole slew of motions by the defense raising this issue. They're going to fail, very likely going to fail. And so then you're going to say, okay, so what's the difference? First of all, that already is like a cost and a distraction.
So, but what are these motions going to be based on? So you said that she's allowed to talk about anything except for the deliberations. Now, I didn't watch her full interviews. I heard snippets of it. She seems starstruck. She's like, oh, Lindsey Graham was so funny and nice and whatever. So, I don't know how close she got to disclosing deliberations in terms of violating the letter of the law. But I'm assuming that these motions are not just going to be, she disclosed deliberations. They're going to be about a potential that they were prejudicial to their client.
Yeah, that's right. First of all, one thing I'll just say, and I think you alluded to this, Asha, I think it's a good point to make, is that she comes off as somebody who is not very serious and is approaching this, I think, with the wrong considerations in mind. Like, oh, I might get to swear in Trump. I was totally hoping he would testify so I'd get to meet him. And like, oh my God, Rudy Giuliani was there. This is so cool. So there's that element to it, because I think, and you may say, well, so what? And it's like, well, it creates a narrative. I'm just saying this as somebody who litigates cases all the time. It gives a picture to the judge of, okay, there may be an issue with this process. In other words, we usually think of this process as like very routine, and this is just how it goes. And yet every defendants want to complain about it, but this is just how it works. And then it's like, I could see some of this raising a judge's eyebrows. Now, the stuff that's probably most problematic that she said is actually stuff that made her seem like really chummy with the prosecutors. She had this one state.
This is the ice cream social.
Yeah,
or whatever.
she talked about how the grand jurors attended an ice cream social at the prosecutor's office, and when she was swearing in a witness, she had like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle ice cream
pop.
Yeah, ice cream pop or something. Those ones you got from the ice cream truck when you were a kid. So, you may be like, so what? So she got an ice cream, $2 ice cream bar, or with inflation, maybe it's a $5 ice cream bar nowadays, but. Why does this matter? And the answer is just grand jurors are supposed to be, while there's it's this weird almost fiction that we have that they're distinct from the prosecutors. They are distinct from the prosecutors. I don't want to say that they aren't, but because the defense doesn't have a role in the grand jury process, they aren't presenting their arguments, they aren't presenting their evidence, they're not there.
It's not adversarial.
Yeah, and of course the prosecutors get to know them over time, and of course they identify more with that side, and that's why there's that joke about how they can indict a ham sandwich or whatever that people talk about. So, but nonetheless, I think what is going to happen is you're going to get these motions from the defense where they portray the whole process as flawed. These grand jurors are, starstruck. They're approaching their duties, and they're going to claim that you can learn about her deliberations from her comments, because you could see that her perspective on the witnesses was all based on her prior prejudices regarding each of these people. And she's in bed with the prosecutor, so to speak. And she's basically excited about these secrets and maybe making decisions because she wants to, have
please the prosecutors.
Yeah, and potentially have some exciting news that she could share to get her 15 minutes of fame. That's how they'll portray it. I think that will fail because there's not a lot of meat in the bones there. It's just it's an ice cream cone and whatever. But it's going to set a bad picture for the prosecution in front of the judge. When I will say I litigate cases against the Justice Department. I've tried cases on behalf of defendants against the Justice Department. I am always looking to knock them down a peg because, and the last criminal trial I had against the DOJ was right before COVID. And I won that trial. And part of what I did was I filed a motion that I knew was a complete loser just to get my entire narrative out in front of the judge to show him this is not your typical case. Like they usually indict these winners, but I'm going to show you this is actually a loser case and they indicted an innocent man. And here's why. And I knew I was going to lose the motion, but the point was to get him to see that he shouldn't give them all these breaks that he might otherwise give them to try to protect a conviction of a person who's obviously guilty. Here, if I was the defense attorney in this case, which I'm not, and I have nothing to do with that, so just preempting the comments, I would be trying to show all this to the judge just to color the judge's view, and I'd be talking about it at trial all over even though I'm not supposed to, I would slip it in whenever I could because I can get away with doing that and find ways to insert that into the trial, even though that's not something you're supposed to do because that's just how defense attorneys try cases is they get this stuff in front of the jury.
I think that's such an interesting point of kind of putting the judge in a psychological posture of wanting to counter any perception that the prosecution has had an unfair advantage by, in some ways, kind of putting the feather on the scale in favor of the defendant, like through the process. That's really interesting. I had not thought of that before, but I could totally see how, as you said, the judge would say, no, I mean, this isn't enough to, dismiss these charges. But then going forward, a judge wants to be seen as being impartial and kind of even the playing field, I guess, even if it's just a matter of perception.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is, most criminal cases are like, ultimately there's so much evidence. Like you got the guy on tape or they're caught with the drugs or they were caught running out of the bank with the money. And the people want to challenge them and raise all these legal issues, and they have the right to do so, but it's a waste of everyone's time. And the judge is really often just focused on making sure that the record on appeal is clean, so she doesn't have to deal with this when, some issue over a second time. But judges do not want somebody railroaded who is either innocent or it's been overcharged or there's some serious issue with the prosecution. And so you have to kind of, if you're a criminal defense attorney, you have to flag for the judge, like, yeah, this is kind of a weird case and there's problems here and you really need to pay attention to this to treat it seriously. And judges know that the prosecution has a lot of advantages. And so like you said, that you need to make sure the judge understands, like, you got to give me some breaks here because they're doing something a little off, a little crazy here. You need to watch this one really closely, judge. And they usually do. And so I think, that is what Fani Willis bought her, unfortunately bought herself here with this grand juror. It's unfortunate. I mean, she didn't select this person. She had no idea, I'm sure, what this person was going to do. But I do think this grand juror complicated things. And by the way, like I said, also created a narrative at trial in the same way that, like, I think the analogy I draw is like the Strzok and Page texts where, that had nothing to do with anything. I mean, that was like not going to, that didn't influence Robert Mueller. He didn't care these people were having an affair and whatever their BS texts were about. But it was a narrative that was not only used in the media by Trump, but you could guarantee that if there was a criminal trial and Peter Strzok was a defendant, like it would have been a whole thing, right? A witness. He would have been a whole thing. And similarly, even if they weren't, it would just it'd been the sort of thing defense attorneys would try to insert into the trial improperly to show bias. And by the way, I've seen a lot of Twitter comments telling me like, oh, prosecutors will just make a motion and that'll never happen. And it's like, oh, my sweet summer child. Like, if you think that's how the real world works of trials, like, oh, you just make motions and everyone complies and, it's all super clean and legal. Like, that's not real trial work, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
so whatever.
And I think even outside of the courtroom, because as you know, Renato, it's not just that the process is fair. It must be perceived as fair. I mean, the
Sure.
legitimacy of the rule of law is, I think of it as, it's like the dollar bill, right? Like people have to believe that it works.
Yeah.
And I think that you're absolutely right that one of the very successful things that Trump has done is to be able to delegitimize and sow seeds of doubt in the justice system among the public. And that erodes the faith of any outcome that comes out of that process. In fact, there's a Yale law professor, Tom Tyler, who talks about legitimacy in the criminal justice process. And he talks about this, that so much of it rests on people have to believe that the process is fair, because that's how they will accept the outcome, even if it's something that they don't like. And when they don't believe that the process is fair, I mean, just look at the election, then they don't accept the outcome.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I will just say that I think Trump did a very masterful job of spreading disinformation during the whole Mueller investigation to suggest that that was all unfair. And there are many Republicans, probably a vast majority of Republicans, who believe that just because it was repeated a lot of times by that side. And I just see the same thing happening here. And I think the issue here is that, frankly, while certainly, Fani Willis is, frankly, I think, operating in a very careful and deliberate manner with regards to this investigation. She is an elected official and has a stake in, how she's perceived by her electorate. And so she was already more vulnerable than a career prosecutor to this sort of attack. So I just think it's going to be very, very substantial in this case. In terms of the bottom line, what I would say is that, people are asking me, does this mean that the prosecution's tanked and all of that work is gone? No, it doesn't mean that. But it's an obstacle that the prosecution has to overcome. And
it's another thing she's going to have to deal with in what is already a very difficult and politically fraught and divisive prosecution, should she choose to bring it.
Yeah, I always thought it was an uphill battle, like the Fulton County DA's office trying to take on the former president of the United States in an unprecedented prosecution, potentially making very broad allegations, and now she's got to take this on as well. It's just it's hard. It's trying to get a prosecution in hard mode.
So just quickly, the last point. What do you think was going through her mind when she saw this? Do you think she threw things? Is she just livid? Like,
I have the feeling. I mean, I'm sure she was just profoundly disappointed, because I will just say, as somebody watching this, I had a profound disappointment in it, because I do care about respecting the law, and I do think that we want to try to preserve a system in which the public does have confidence in it. And yeah. I actually was kind of horrified to see it myself. I can only imagine her reaction.
Yeah. And just as a coda, I saw an article that said that at least some legislation had been introduced in Georgia to essentially make the law more analogous to other states and federal law in terms of grand juror secrecy. So it sounds like a lot of people found this very problematic.
Yeah, very good idea, because the next person, I mean, it could be a mass murderer, right? Who ends up you get the wrong grand juror. And she's also, I think, setting a precedent that other grand jurors are like, oh, well, she got on TV all the time. Ooh, I'm gonna do the same thing. It's just a bad idea. So, Asha, what do you make of this decision by McCarthy to release all of the surveillance footage from January 6th to Tucker Carlson and his team and no one else?
Wow, I don't even know where to start. I mean, it's, first of all, this is like all of the surveillance footage. We're talking about I think it was something along the lines of 44,000 hours of security footage. Now, beyond, what Tucker Carlson could, how he would possibly, actually analyze all this, let's first start with just the security problems, right? Having all of that security footage really offers a lot of information and intelligence to nefarious actors, right? It shows where all the cameras are located, what the angles are. It reveals what was happening inside. How did security respond? Where were members of Congress taken? I mean, all of these things are revealed for someone who wants to improve what they did the second time around. What did the 9/11 hijackers do before they, flew planes into buildings? They went into security. They went into airports and tested security and went through, the checks and see if they could bring box cutters through. Like, this is what bad people do. This is what terrorists do. And basically, we've handed this over to someone who, P.S., actively supports domestic terrorists, right? To the point where he thinks that they're patriots and calls them that. The second thing is, in terms of the propaganda aspect, this is literally coming on the heels of this Dominion voting system filing, which tells us something we already knew, but it tells us in black and white in a court filing that Fox News actively lies to its viewers and tells them what they want to hear. And so, I mean, it's pretty obvious what Tucker is going to do with this, right? What do Fox News viewers want to hear about January 6th? That they were peaceful, that they were patriots, that they were let in by the police, that, they were, that Ashley Babbitt was unfairly killed, all of this stuff. And so what I expect to see is that this footage is going to be very selectively edited into some propaganda reel that's going to be put out. So, I mean, that's my take on it, is that this is both a security problem and I think legitimacy problem. And what happens is that it then really dilutes the impact of the very careful footage that I think the January 6th committee provided, which wasn't, as far as I can tell, most of it was not security footage. Like, most of it was like public footage,
button cam things too from the cops,
right,
or things like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think that, what they want to do is muddy the waters, and potentially in advance of charges that might be brought for the violence on January 6th.
Yeah, I really agree with the thrust of what you're saying. I mean, obviously Tucker Carlson is, a propagandist. I mean, I wouldn't, I don't think anyone, even before the Dominion suit, I don't think anyone considered him a neutral purveyor of anything. And as you point out, I mean, there's just massive security issues here. And McCarthy's explanation for why he did this is, I had made a promise. I mean, this was, as far as I could tell, this was part of the secret handshake, deal that he made to get the speakership. Was that
with co-conspirators of January 6th,
right? Who want to have the footage out there for the reasons you say. They want to find, is there a cop who just stood there as people were coming in? I mean, I suspect if you go through the footage, you will find Capitol police officers who are like, you know what, I don't want to get the crap beaten out of me by 200 people trying to get in through this door. I'm just going to stand there and let it happen, to preserve their own life or safety or some other reason. And that could be taken out of context to suggest that, oh yeah, these people were totally invited. We actually wanted these people to like defecate in the House chamber or whatever. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I initially thought and I'm struggling to think about how this would be framed. So maybe it's not a legal issue, but if there does seem to be sort of I don't know if it would be a First Amendment issue, but an equal access issue. I'm struggling to see how the government could provide, or government official can provide all of that to one news organization.
Yeah,
and prohibit it from another. Like, that seems really strange, and it's not quite viewpoint discrimination, but in some ways it sort of is. I
It's
don't know.
interesting. Yeah, I don't. It's interesting. It's the sort of claim I don't expect to get brought. I mean, I'm sure a lot of news organizations are upset about it. I mean,
Well, they are suing
mhm.
for access, so I don't know. I'm not sure on what grounds, but
Well, the mere act of suing. I mean, there's another thing where there's the shades of gray thing that I hope our listeners understand.
have come to
Have
appreciate.
come to appreciate is that merely filing a lawsuit imposes costs on the other side, and it forces the other side to reckon with the arguments and the issues. And so, for a news organization, just merely saying, "Okay, we're going to file suit and we're going to grind you out and do this," it's like, okay, well, whoever CBS News, they've certainly got the money to hire lawyers, and if they're going to do that, then I think the House has to pay attention. What I will say is there has been some movement. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene told reporters the other day that there supposedly is going to be a deal that McCarthy's going to make to provide this to other outlets and to sort of have some agreement regarding security. The cat may already be out of the bag regarding Tucker Carlson, but I think that it must be the case that they thought there was some risk regarding, like you said, regarding a suit. I don't know off the top of my head what the claims would be. So, you mentioned viewpoint discrimination. You might want to explain what that is. I think that doesn't seem quite right to me here, but I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly fit. So basically, First Amendment jurisprudence is complicated, but among some of the basic doctrines is this idea that the government, to the extent that it engages in any kind of restrictions on First Amendment activity, it can't discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. In other words, it can't allow some people to speak and other people to not speak based on the fact that some have a particular opinion and others have a different opinion. It has to be viewpoint neutral.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that was the first thing that came to mind, but I think you're right. Like, I'm not sure that this fits neatly into that. But it just seems in my gut problematic.
It is.
I mean, you can imagine, I guess, can Biden just say, I only allow MSNBC reporters to come into the press room and come with me on, Air Force One? Like, they are the only ones who will have any kind of access. I suppose theoretically he could, maybe. I don't know. But that seems like we would intuitively find that weird and problematic.
Yeah.
And kind of Orwellian.
Well, you remember when Jim Acosta had his credential revoked, right? By the Trump White House. That was a big part of the argument that they ended up dropping that or losing that because he had a valid First Amendment argument there. He was basically they were retaliating against him for taking a view contrary to the administration. So it's possible. I think, it's interesting. I mean, one thing I will say is the legislature, I think here is exempt from FOIA. I don't think members of Congress are subject to FOIA. So it's not like there's a FOIA sort of issue. At least that's my brief understanding of FOIA law. Somebody doesn't practice in that area. But I do think that there's clearly some sort of claim that can be made here. And, lawyers, it's not going to surprise all of you that, lawyers get paid a lot of money to think this stuff up and figure out arguments to make. And as long as you have a good enough argument to get to court, that alone imposes a lot of costs. And I just don't, if I'm Kevin McCarthy, I don't really want to be litigating this for months and spending a ton of time and energy on dumping a bunch of security tapes to Tucker. But I do think it's unfortunate. I mean, I think one point you made that I think is important and worth reemphasizing is the security issues, right? And, what this now means is that we may have to change where all the cameras are and build a whole new system for what we're going to do in the case of an attack and all sorts of other things. And we're doing all of this just because McCarthy cut a deal with, as you put it, people who were involved in the January 6th, matter themselves, who wanted, promote disinformation to the public, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's a real security risk. I mean, we have no idea who Tucker Carlson might share this footage with, P.S. And we did, in fact, have people who have been convicted a seditious conspiracy, which is essentially, trying to levy war against the United States. So it's not just, I think, a hypothetical concern. These are people who have already tried to attack the seat of government. And we have someone who is sympathetic to and potentially connected to that movement, now in possession of information that could be helpful to those designs.
Yeah. I obviously concerning.
I guess when I was kind of querying other lawyers about this, and I was like, how can McCarthy do this? And the answer was, well, he can do anything he wants as the House Speaker. But it sounds like Schumer also has the same ability. But I suspect that I suspect that Democrats understanding the security issues have to think about the trade-off between that and being the ones responsible for releasing these tapes to other news organizations. My guess is they want McCarthy to him to be the one who gets his hands dirty in doing any of this.
Yeah, Schumer wrote like a pretty aggressive letter about it and condemned it and that sort of thing. So I agree. It also creates a false equivalence. Like whatever, let's just say that Schumer gives it to all the other media, then it's going to buy into the conservative idea that all the media are biased in favor of the Democrats, when all Schumer would really be doing is kind of evening the playing field amongst all of the news organizations. So yeah, what an unfortunate situation. But I have to say, it's sort of emblematic of how unserious House Republicans are. I mean, there was a tweet recently where this House Republican's like, oh, we've changed everything and done all this stuff, and this amazing job we've done since we've taken over. They haven't passed a single bill. They haven't done anything, as far as I can tell. But yet, it's all this sort of clown show stuff. Like give all of our security tapes to a propagandist or whatever. So, Asha, last week we talked a little bit about the controversy with the Nikki Haley dust up. And, one thing that we didn't talk about that really struck me is, I'm going to confess that I don't usually go through the comments on your tweets. I read your tweets. I don't know if I read every random person who responds. And I started doing it during that controversy. And it was amazing to me how many creeps that you have responding to your tweets and really just saying all sorts of things about you and your appearance. Some of them do it on our own YouTube channel too. I'm curious. I'm assuming this isn't new, and I'm just curious, how you deal with that and what that's like for you.
Were they stalker creeps or were they harassing creeps? And I'm asking because I don't always see all of those, at least on Twitter, because I have my settings adjusted, so I only see comments from people who follow me. So often swarm trolls don't show up for me when I see the notifications and things like that.
That's already a consequence though, because I don't do that. I don't need to. I mean, there are people who say mean things about me. That's par for the course. I have people try to say what they think are threatening things. I'm not very scared of them, right. But I'm willing to listen to or willing to see the comments from other people because they're not bothering me as much as I suspect these people bother you. It was like all these people like, oh, you're so beautiful. And all this sort of BS. I'm sure that's got to get old.
Yeah, it gets old. I mean, I just ignore it really. I don't know. I mean, there's only been a couple of instances where it's kind of crossed a threshold to become alarming. I had one person who got to be kind of so excessive, both on Twitter and then on Instagram and DMing me on Instagram that I blocked him. Then he got really angry that I blocked him. So he started emailing me. And at that point I had to contact Yale security because I was like, I don't know what this guy's going to do. It's going to show up at my house or something like that. And that's on kind of the stalker side. Then there's the other side, right? Which is I remember there was a clip a couple of weeks ago This is when I was sick, and I showed up in my sweatshirt and whatever, and somebody's like, oh, look at the bags under her eyes. And there's always, comments about your nose, comments about your hair. Recently in the Nikki Haley thing, like some account had a screen grab of me and had like frozen it in some like weird distorted facial expression, and then I had like all these guys like making fun of how I look, and whatever, like so that's all there. I guess that doesn't bother me because, I mean, for better or worse, that's just not like a point of insecurity for me. So I'm just like, all right, like I wouldn't give you the time of day anyway. So, thank you. Leave me alone. But I think it is something that women have to deal with. Like, comments about their appearance are pervasive. Even when I started doing TV, I would get people emailing me, telling me I shouldn't be wearing sleeveless things, or, you're showing too much cleavage. Like, and I'm like, why are you looking at, like, but I don't even know. Like, there was just like a lot of weird stuff. And I think it is something that men just don't have to think about or deal with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think I do. I mean, I occasionally get people comment on my appearance, who some of whom have strong opinions about certain things. I've gotten people saying that certain things I wear are stupid looking. I've had a lot of people say I should shave my beard or this or that, all sorts of stuff like that. But it's so much less than you. I have had the creepy stalker types as well, but it's just, I think there's a couple of things. One is I'm sure I was just from judging from the comments on one of your tweets that I looked at randomly, I think it's a lot less than what you get, but also I'm not scared of those people. In other words, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I was scared.
You're not worried that they're going to show up at your door and you don't need
and attack you. Right. Exactly. Like, there was a woman who was tremendously, unbelievably stalking and harassing me on all sorts of mediums all over the place. But I was just like some crazy person from Washington State. Like, whatever, like, come at me, I mean, do what you're going to do. I was concerned when criminals who like, there was a guy who escaped from prison who wanted to kill me. I'm not concerned about like, some random bozo off the internet, people in their internet words.
Yeah. I mean, and it can feel physically threatening. Like I said, I did have to call security once and just get their advice on what to do. And they had me put an app on my phone and keep tabs and save all the emails and things like that. But it reminds me of this saying that I've seen a few times, which is something along the lines of, men's greatest fear is that a woman will humiliate them. And a woman's greatest fear is that a man will kill them. And it's sort of like this kind of trying to highlight the asymmetry between, what is the extreme consequence of, these different, approaches, I guess, or responses by unhinged people.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, men should think more about. I think that particularly, I don't know what people think they're accomplishing with these comments that they're making, but it's not only really weird and inappropriate, but it's just, you're actually making yourself look like a fool and potentially hurting someone else. I don't understand it, but I want to get your comment on it, because I was like, it was so taken by that. I was like, wow, there's a lot more of this than I thought. Like, this must happen every day to her.
Yeah. And it is, I think I pay a less attention to the stocky side. Maybe I don't see them. I feel like my followers kind of know to be respectful. I have really good loyal followers on Twitter, and I haven't seen anything go too far, though maybe they're being screened out. I do think that there is, definitely a trolling aspect to women based on physical appearance.
MSW Media.